This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
Chris.
Oh, man. So,
Dude, what's
I'm
up?
just going to start on a rant.
Dude,
How's that
perfect,
sound?
because I got a rant to roll right after it, dude.
All right.
Run it up, dude. Run it up.
You see this computer behind me that's disassembled on the floor?
Yes, I do.
Well, I built that like 10 months ago. This is why I buy Apple products, because everything was working fine until I walk into my office this morning and my computer's on like full tilt, fans 100%. And I'm like, what is going on here? I don't remember running anything overnight. And then it reboots 10 seconds later and I'm like, oh no. And it boots back up. The fans go full tilt, except for the ones in the front. The case fans just turn lights on, but nothing else. So I am disconnecting everything. I bought another kit of RAM to go because Asus was like, well, the sticks of RAM you bought, even though they work for the last 10 months, they're not certified or like verified. So we can't rule that out. And I'm like, okay. It's one of those days, man. Every time I build a computer, every single time, you end up with some weird issues like that. And they can be like 10 months later, which is the worst. So hopefully everything is fine. I don't know if my CPU cooler is working. I can't hear the pump running when I turn it on, so it could be that. The guy at Micro Center was like, I don't think it would be overheating in 10 seconds like that and then restarting. And I was like, I don't think so either. But there's a red light on the motherboard that says it's the CPU or an issue with that. So no idea. After we record, I'm going to pop those RAM sticks in and then probably have to go return them to the store when it doesn't fix the issue. So I hate everything. I just want my stuff to work.
It's so frustrating. Yeah, I know.
I used to
I
love that stuff. Like I used to have fun doing this in high school or college or whatever. Now I got responsibilities. Need my stuff to work.
See, I broke all my automations the other day, but there's a button on my desk, and me and my coworker have an inside joke. Whenever we're about to say something controversial, I say opinion alert and I double tap this button and all the lights in my room shut off. And then the light behind me just starts flashing blue and red like the cops are after you.
Nice.
So when you said that comment about Windows, I was like, oh God, they're going to come.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. I was on Windows up until college, dude. I refurbished Windows machines. I built Windows machines. I like sold Windows machines. I've done a lot with Windows, and I will never touch it again.
You know, I thought things were a lot better, and I don't know what caused this issue or whatever, but things have been pretty solid on Windows 11 for a while till today. But yeah, my plan is to run Proxmox on there, and then I can have a whole bunch of Ubuntu virtual machines test Hatchbox against, and I was running them in Windows 11 on VirtualBox, and it was great. But
so I have a question.
Yes.
So you built that computer, right?
With my bare hands.
But you're just running Linux virtual machines off of it? Why not just build a Linux machine?
Well, so Proxmox is a Debian distro that is kind of a hypervisor. So I'll be able to run Linux on it. I think you can run Docker containers, maybe not directly, but depends on like if you're running TrueNAS or whatever. There's a whole bunch of other similar things like Unraid. And then what's cool is you can run Windows in there and then pass the GPU through to it. So you can run it. And if you want to play games or something in your Windows, like VM, or it's not like a bare metal install of Windows, but it's close enough that it knows how to forward the resources to it. And I was like, it'd be really nice just have some sort of Proxmox manager for all the VMs. And because we got to be testing the upcoming Ubuntu release and everything on Hatchbox as early as we can. It's kind of perfect for me to do that. And then I just got a 13900K in it so it can run a ton of stuff at the same time, and bought more RAM today than I need. Well, more than I had previously, but
You installed some more, download some more RAM.
If that, yeah, you wouldn't download a RAM.
Not just one.
But yeah, we'll see. I'm like
jealous that you have a Micro Center, number one. Number two, I really don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I feel like you were one of those kids that made a Hackintosh.
Oh yeah, I used to use a Hackintosh. Yeah,
there you go. I could spot them, dude.
When you don't have the $4,000 to buy, you know, a MacBook Pro or whatever it was. Yeah, I went through that trouble. for a while, it was actually really good until Apple started like, we're not going to use the NVIDIA cards anymore or whatever.
Right.
Then it became a real pain. And maybe you can still do it, but there's a ton of people working on that stuff. It's wild.
Right.
And for the longest time, like I built a $500 desktop that ran OS 10, Mac OS, and it was killer. And it worked great until it didn't. And then it was this situation again. Wasn't usually hardware problems, but sometimes you got more time than money and you don't mind going down that route. Other times you got more money than time, and that's a different way to approach problems. Throw money at it. Go buy your $40,000 Mac Pro with wheels and a $5,000 monitor with a $1,000 stand. Do it. Dare you.
Yeah, I won't. No, you're right. Very cheap about computers. I will run them basically till they're dead. I was on like a $30 pulled out of the trash and put parts in it laptop before I got a MacBook Pro for graduation from high school going into college.
Oh, yeah.
That was the first time I ever had a Mac. I was doing fine before that. I felt no need to install Hackintosh, but my buddy, a few years older than me, probably right around your age, that was all he was into at the time.
The reason I did the Hackintosh was actually because I wanted, when I was screencasting, like more or less to have a ton of storage in there. So the only real option you had was like build a Hackintosh, and then you can put 8 hard drives in your desktop machine or something, and have tons of storage for all your screencasts and the raw recordings and whatever else. So that was like led me to it, because I had a MacBook Pro, which became a very easy sell once I saw how easy it was in 2010 how to install Rails on a Mac versus on Linux. And I was like compiling stuff and whatever from source on Linux, and watched my coworker while I was in school. We were working on stuff for a professor, and he sets a new iMac up and was like, brew install this, brew install that. And I'm like, what is happening? Why is this so easy? So I was pretty sold, but yeah.
So when you need to install an application on your Mac, do you install it with Brew, or do you go to the website or the App Store?
It depends. I've been avoiding Homebrew more and more because...
Wait, why? I need to hear why.
Well, stuff like installing Postgres on there, it's like you brew install Postgres and it picks whatever the curve... Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, you really need, for certain things, you don't just want the latest version. You want to be able to run 2 versions or 3 versions at the same time. That's why we use ASDF for Ruby. So, your database.
Redis, Yarn, dude. I use it for NPM, dude. I use it for Rust, Go. I use ASDF for everything.
Yeah. You can also do Docker for all that, but it's a different can of worms. Have you seen Table Plus?
Yep.
They have another project called DB Engine, and it can detect your Homebrew services, but it can also download and install any Postgres version. They're missing 16, and I don't know if they haven't been working on it a lot, or maybe it hasn't got the adoption that they want. It's awesome. It's just a little app that runs up in your menu bar, and then it shows me Caddy from Homebrew, Grafana, Mealysearch, Memcached, Postgres, 15 and 16. Apparently I have both of those installed. Redis, MySQL, but then you just click plus and it's like, do you want to install Postgres, MySQL, or Redis? Is it the ARM version, the Intel version, whatever? And they can set those up and run them separately, because that is one of the annoying things about Homebrew is it kind of is written. Same with like Linux packages where it's like, you want to install Redis? Well, you get the version of Redis and that's it.
Not MySQL at 5.7.
Yeah.
Literally everything you mentioned, ASDF can be used to manage. Just ASDF everything.
Yeah, I love ASDF. It is killer. Somebody asked for us to support Bun on Hatchbox because we use ASDF. It was as simple as
do?
Install the Bun plugin and then it's done. And that was it. It just worked. And I was like, yes.
Installing Rust with ASDF for YJIT was perfect and fine. But I will say, I had tried to do something with WebAssembly several months ago, and everything online was like, use Rust up. Just trust me, brother. Use Rust up. Do not use anything else. Use Rust up. I promise. And I was like, no, I'm going to use ASDF. an hour or two later, I'm like messing through like these dependencies that won't do anything. And I'm like, I don't understand why this is happening. So I uninstalled the ASDF Rust package, used Rust up. It worked perfectly.
Nice.
But I haven't had any trouble this time around. So
yeah, I guess that's what I use too, because the official install page for Rust uses Rust up. So that must be what I've done too. Because we compile Ruby with YJIT for Hatchbox. So I think one of my VMs or something, I was compiling on one of our live servers, but I ran out of disk space because I went back and had it compile like we had for older Rubies that are end of life. We had just compiled like the latest version because we were like, look, if you're going to be running Ruby 2.2, there's no reason you shouldn't be on the latest version of 2.2 or whatever. You should upgrade anyways, but we're just going to precompile those. But the other day I was like, you know what, screw it. It's just a little storage. Let's get them all compiled and then it's easier for any new customers that want to use that. But that was like install Rust, and then that was like 1.5 gigs, and then every version of Ruby, the source code, and then the compiled version of it and whatever. Like I blew through some disk space pretty fast. And then one of them failed because that's a lot of time to compile that stuff. It was like a long script it was trying to run for every version. And I don't know how many we made it through, but it was halfway through. And then I had to wait another hour or something for it to finish everything else out when I detected that it was crashed or whatever from disk space. But
I learned a trick the other day. What you reminded me of it while you were talking about figuring out which version of Ruby. So in your terminal, do type and then Ruby.
Yeah.
And then you can do type Rust C as well to figure out which one. Now this morning, I don't know why, it was listing both the Homebrew packet path and user bin Ruby, which I was like, why are you doing this? But I restarted my computer and then it stopped. So
yeah, I can't remember because type will let you know if it's shell function or an alias or
built
something.
in.
Yeah. I always use which, and that works pretty well, but I always forget about type.
Type is nice because for a while I was trying to figure out what the difference between a CLI and a built-in command was. And that's the easiest way to tell. You type cat, it's not going to link to a CLI, I don't think.
It is a program.
Defaults is one. Oh, LS.
Yeah.
Unless
LS,
you have that aliased.
It says LS is an alias for LS-G for me because I got it. LS
I saw how to break through the alias the other day, but I forget now. What else you got? CD. Type CD.
I think that's a program too.
Is it really?
No, it's a shell built in, at least in ZSH.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
ZSH
yeah, it's kind of cool that it can show you that stuff. It's pretty similar to, type in JavaScript or whatever, or Ruby even, is a whatever. What is your rant?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Glad you
Let's just take a little delay or a little tangent for 30 minutes and talk about
it. It will actually segue straight into there, so it's actually perfect. I'm having a problem. So today we had someone come and speak at work during like a meeting and like educate us more Postgres, right? And
nice.
I'm sitting in that meeting and I'm like, on my goal list for this year is to become much more confident in my SQL skills.
Yes.
And I'm reading a Postgres book by Andy Atkinson. I'm doing the work. I'm trying to like use SQL more instead of just bumping to the Rails console. And then all of a sudden, like nobody's problem, here comes frickin' SQLite just banging down the door like the Kool-Aid man. Remember when we had Derek Sivers? Do you remember when we had Derek Sivers on the podcast? He got me really, really excited about this idea of building my own database that just does what I want it to. And like I started learning about data warehouses and started exploring like different tools to build them up. And I was like, I'm going to build it in Postgres, dude. I'm going to build a Postgres database. And I'm going to get really good at Postgres. And then SQLite came out and I saw a tool, or I remembered a tool called Dataset that I had seen in the past, which basically does all this really great stuff for you. I'm not going to explain it. Just can't do it justice by explaining it on audio. So go watch the video on the homepage. It's really cool. It basically gives you all these tools to quickly build your own data warehouse with SQLite, and I want it.
Nice. You reminded me that the other day I was helping a customer on Hatchbox who wanted to use Table Plus to connect to their database. Well, as it turns out, you can't just connect to SQLite remotely over SSH because, well, it's just a file and not a network service. So apparently, Table Plus will download the file if it's not that big, but if it's of whatever size, basically, they're like, yeah, that's actually way harder than it sounds. We don't support that. So you can't like use Table Plus to connect to a remote SQLite database, which kind of sucks. I was like, man.
So I use SQL Pro, and they have an app on the iPhone, and it has SQLite, the ability to connect to a SQLite database. And the only reason why I hadn't pulled the trigger on SQLite was because of what you just said, where I was like, well, if I'm going to make a database, what's the point of having a database I can only access on my computer?
Yeah.
And so I was like, it'd be ideal.
Copy it to your phone or whatever.
Exactly.
Like,
I don't want to do all that. So, and I also don't want to make an
merge
app.
It somehow if you want to change it or whatever. Like,
No.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. Actually, kind of curious. I'm going to have to try that after this, see what it does for SQLite on iPhone.
What's cool is how simple it is and like how powerful it is for that simplicity. But there's sort of the reason why it's too simple for a lot of cases like that, where you're like, I want to access it remotely. Well, like you could clone it and then use a separate copy to access it, but that's just not sort of what it was designed for. So it's interesting to see that. And it's like, I don't know, super duper amount of hype around SQLite the last few months. It's wild.
Yes. Jamie dropped us, dude, whenever Jamie starts cooking, dude, oh my God, I grab like the popcorn, and I'm not going to lie, I save everything. Anytime Jamie cooks, I put it into a file and I put it into a folder on my computer.
Nice.
And
you put it in your local SQLite database.
Exactly. Well,
in the future, this is future you.
We were talking about SQLite earlier, and he was like gathering a lot of momentum. But you know what it really feels like? It feels like a hype train.
Yeah.
And then he started like listing off reasons why you should use one or the other, like actual reasons. And he just kind of capped it off. Well, most people are just going to be like, well, I don't have to pay for a database server. And that's the advantage. And that's the dumbest way to make that decision.
It is one of those things that happens way too often in just general online discussions, is like when you're hyping something up, you like never talk about the downsides of it. And that is kind of, I feel like, what's going on at the moment, where it's like there's a bunch of cool stuff going on. And maybe some of these things are like going to be solved because people are like, well, we'd like to include the adoption or improve the adoption of SQLite. So maybe someone will build a little tool for you to access it remotely or something. But yeah, at the moment, it feels like the hype cycle where people are like, oh my God, look at how perfect React is. And then it's like, well, until people start actually using it, the nuances come in then. So it's easy to gloss over a lot of stuff. But
did you know that the number one reason startups fail is that they run out of money? There are so many ways for startups to lose money, but downtime shouldn't be one. Recent studies found that downtime can cost $427 per minute for small businesses and up to $9,000 per minute for medium-sized businesses. That's every single minute. But a monthly subscription with Honeybadger helps you prevent costly downtime by giving you all the monitoring you need in one easy-to-use platform so you can quickly understand what's going on and how to fix it, which, my friend, helps you stay in business. And best of all, Honeybadger is free for small teams, and setup takes as little as 5 minutes. Get started today at honeybadger.io. Again, that's www.honeybadger.io.
this is a side tangent, but this week in Rails just got tweeted about 59 seconds ago. Shout out to your boy Colin Gilbert for being the number one PR today. He and I were talking about one of our Go Rails community members. She had like not set an instance variable, and then form with was like, yo, what are you talking about? This model you passed in is nil. So we've been talking a lot about sort of the ergonomics of stuff. And he was like, I'm going to go try and see what it would take to like refactor Rails to give a friendlier error if that happens. And his solution was cool. It turned out that like rather than the default value of model being nil in form with, you could just change it to false. So it was like, there's either an object or false or nil. So sort of 3 cases. And by looking at that, like if you ever pass a nil, it's like, hey, we know that you passed something into this argument because it wasn't false, the default value, but it also wasn't like an active record object. So he was able to do that, and that got merged, but then it's actually getting pulled back temporarily because that was a breaking change. And so he's got to introduce deprecation warnings first that whatever the next release of Rails is 7.2, and then the next release after that, the original pull request can be like added in there. So he had a pull request in today that was like, here's the deprecation of it. We're effectively going to sort of revert what we got and then add that functionality in later permanently. It was cool to see that. I was excited for him to get all those things merged. That's a great contribution.
Yeah, I was talking to him on Monday, and he was like, I'm thinking about maybe doing a Rails PR. And I was like, dude, do it. If I had one that I was like, yeah, this is the one that I can make, you best believe I'd be cooking. So shout out to Colin. That's awesome.
Along those lines, did you grab a copy of Campfire and look at the source code at all?
No, I did not. And you want to know why? Oh, actually, I can't say why. But
all right,
I'll tell you why after. Better hit me with that floppy disk, bro.
Yeah. I grabbed a copy, and it was funny because the initial sort of reaction I had was, this is all pretty standard, what I would expect. There wasn't anything like terribly exciting. If you pay close enough attention, there's a lot of interesting ways that they do things. But most importantly, I feel like the naming of everything was done really, really well. But it was also one of those moments where I was like, oh, I felt like I expected it to be some really interesting sort of complex things. But that's actually the beauty of the whole thing, is like how easy it is to comprehend and how simple every controller is, or every model, because they've given them proper names to things and organized it into concerns and active record objects and controllers and everything in the way that you should have done it. And I was like, for one, this is probably a good sign that like I felt almost underwhelmed looking at the code, because it was like, yeah, this is exactly what I expected. This is how I would have done it for most of it, which is a good sign, because I'm like, oh, I picked up a lot of interesting things along the way.
Humble brag or not, dude?
Well, it's like I remember watching, you remember the on writing software well videos that DHH had posted?
Came right when I started becoming a developer.
Yeah. I remember seeing those and being like mind blown, because there was just some really basic things that he would do in those videos that I was like, I never thought about doing it that way. And so I've like over the years tried to, what would David do or whatever, you know, as I'm working, and like, how would they write it at 37 signals? It was kind of fun because I realized like I feel a little underwhelmed, because actually I realize now that I've adopted a lot of those same practices and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is actually really good and encouraging, because I feel like I actually did have a way to sort of measure my learnings and skill level as a Rails developer or whatever. So that was kind of cool. But there's little things. I just made a screencast on this before reading the source code, noticing that they use the same thing. But most people don't know that a has many can have a block given to it where you can add methods to your associations that are not on the original associated record model. That stuff they used in a few places, which was super cool. And I was like, I literally just recorded a screencast about it the other morning. And I was like, you never see this, but it can be very handy. And then to see it confirmed in Campfire, I was like, oh, perfect timing. But do you guys have any of those in Podia?
Maybe. I don't know what you speak of. I do, but I don't. I was just reading the docs, so like maybe I saw it somewhere in there.
Here's why it came up this week, and we talk about this in the screencast. So basically, like you say a user has many accounts, for example. What you can do on that is you can say has many accounts, do in a block inside of it, and that block gets evaluated on. So when you say current user.accounts, that is called a collection proxy, which is like a class inside of the account model that Active Record like dynamically defines for you. This is all like very top of mind for me because I'm doing the same stuff in the new version of Noticed, where we're defining these classes when you inherit from a noticed event or notifier thing. So these collection proxies are like defined where it's what keeps track of like, we're going to inject the current user ID into every query when you use this association. So you can add methods to it there. And one of the ways that the prefixed ID gem that I've written, one of the ways that works is by tapping the has many associations and saying, hey, let's include these class methods. So you can do like current user.accounts.find by prefix ID, and that method is just added automatically to it. But that doesn't work if you're going through associations and the parent model is also not a prefixed ID model. So I was able to inject those methods on the association by saying has many accounts. And instead of doing the block, you can actually give it a lambda and you can call extending, and extending will take a module and then extend the proxy with that module. Or there's an extend option that's not in the docs in Rails at all, but that works too. And was what I was using. I didn't get any deprecation warnings for it, so it's just not documented, but I remember finding that reading the Rails, the active record source code or whatever. But you can do some powerful stuff with that. And it's one of the things it's like, yeah, there's a paragraph in the docs about it, but unless you have a real need for it, you're never going to use it. But it's super handy when you want to do something like the user will have a default account or something, and I want to be able to say like current user.accounts.default, and default doesn't need to be a scope or a class method on the account model. I can just make a method only available from the user association, which is like freaking sweet. I was like, oh, cool. Like they use that too in Campfire. Another one that I remember, and I've seen this looking at Hey or Basecamp's JavaScript, but they have like a current.js file that will look at the meta tags and look at the current user ID and current account ID or room ID. Yeah, they got that in Campfire.
I borrowed
too.
that pattern.
It's
not the
genius.
current part of it, but I borrowed the like using a meta tag for like storing state on the front end.
Yeah, freaking awesome.
It works beautifully, dude. It's all in Podia now.
I don't remember where I first saw it, but I was like, no way, of course. Like, this is genius. And yeah, it's the same thing. Basically, they put it in a current lib file, and then you say current.room, just like you would do with current attributes server side. And it's freaking awesome to have that accessible in your JavaScript as well with effectively the same interface. All they do is make a JavaScript object and put the ID in there. That's it. There's no other attributes in there, but you totally could if you needed to keep track of like current.user and have their ID and their email and maybe their name on the client side. Just put that in an object and bam, you're done. It's another one of those really great patterns. So shout out. It's like $299. I thought it was going to be like on the high end of the under $1,000 range that they had talked about, but it's super affordable. If you just want to buy it to learn from, it's worth it. So I've been poking at it every day or something. Is there another file that I haven't looked at that might give me some ideas on how I could refactor something or just think through a problem in a different way? So worth it. So.
Yeah, 100%. All right. I was looking for something for the past like 2 minutes because when you were talking about that method, that active record method, I found a method in active record the other day that truly blessed me at the right time. So you probably know that you can pass context into your validations. So you can call valid ? And pass it context.
Yes. I always forget about that.
So I solved a problem, and honestly, I don't care what anyone says. I think it was the most beautiful thing ever. I found this thing called validation context, which is very hard to find. Validation context, though, is available inside of the validates proc. So like you can do validates name presence true if, and then open your curly brackets, validation context does not equal custom, for instance. You can do a little bit more than just that simple thing. And I was like, how about we only validate this thing under this specific circumstance using this validation context. And then we can avoid this issue with this callback.
Ooh, that's
And
interesting.
It felt good. It felt real good.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing because, like, my favorite applications are the ones where it's like, hey, you want to start creating something? Just fill out whatever you feel like filling out or whatever you can right now, and we'll save it in a draft state until it's like ready to go. You know, like some applications, it's like, you want to create a new project, and you click new project and it takes you to a page and it's saved a new project without any data in it. And you can just refer back to it. You can refresh the page and it's like the same record and it just saved it without anything. It's like such an odd thing because most Rails applications, you go in immediately, you're like, validate this, validate that, validate everything, as if your user is going to always put in every piece of data in the one form before they even save it. And it's like, no, the real world best flow for this is almost always, if you're in Campfire, like you want to create a new room, what if we just create a new room with a blank name or a random name, and then you can edit it instead of having to force you to decide on a name before we even let you do that? It's such a cool flow, but yeah, I think it's one of those situations where like validate context is like incredibly useful because you could be like, well, we need to validate X, Y, or Z, even if you didn't put any data in. But then once you have, and you're like actually doing this, or you're updating the record, if you're going to update the room, we're going to force you to put in a name at this point. It's a great way of breaking the validations down instead of having some sort of like, well, we're going to validate the room presence if the state of this is pending or something. You don't have to do any of the conditionals all over your validations, which get crazy in the weeds, especially if your record has multiple steps or whatever.
Yeah, I've got a perfect example for you.
I was just thinking about if you're building a wizard with multiple steps, you could use the step name as the context.
I was using it in an auto-saving context. So imagine this. You are on an auto-saving form. Let's say there's a title and then there's several other fields. Let's say you come to the form and delete the title, making that object invalid, right?
Yes.
Then you continue editing, let's say for 30 minutes. And then you finally fix that title. But Rails will update that title and everything else is gone off into the ether. It's only going to, because nothing that happened once it became invalid was persisting. So by using the validation context, you can be like, I don't care if this is like nil. I want you to save everything else.
Yeah.
And don't do this check under this certain circumstance because we're okay with it being nil in this situation.
Right. It's definitely not super simple. It is complex to set that up properly, but yeah, I think it's almost too easy for people to just look at forms and database models and just think, oh, we set all the rules here. We always require everything. And you really, for good applications, creating probably most anything on Podia is a sort of multi-step process. Imagine you had to create a course on Podia and you had to edit everything on one form. It's like the title, you throw Cocoon at it, every single step in the course is a title, maybe a file upload, maybe a description, maybe whatever, and then save all of it at once. Like you would never do that. But even the like tiny little bits of it, like having that auto save and the flexibility of all that is like super duper useful. I'm going to have to do a video on the validation context because I don't believe I ever have. And every time that I remember it exists, I'm like, this is awesome. And I forget about it and I actually don't use it almost ever.
Yeah.
So why doesn't everybody know about this feature whenever I see it? Why do I not use this? I just forget about it. So I love it.
Great way to skip a validation, which is a very hard thing to do.
Yeah. I installed the Rails LSP the other day and I love it.
So you're in VS Code now?
Trying.
Dude, I'm so freaking offended right now. It's crazy.
I reinstalled VS Code NeoVim and it's going to be my savior that will convert me.
Is it that good? I haven't tried the NeoVim in VS Code because I heard someone not give a good review on it.
Yeah, I know what I was reading was basically the same thing. Like, it's still not Vim, but the VS Code Vim plugin,
that's what I use,
just constantly drives me nuts because little basic things that I do, like Shift J and K or whatever, go.
You have to add in your own bindings to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can add custom bindings.
Some of those will like actually move a line instead of highlighting a line in visual mode or whatever. And those like differences drive me nuts. And then I don't have time or really want to go and fix all the bindings so that they match what I'm used to. So I'm hoping that the NeoVim will be closer, that I could get used to it. And I haven't gone through and tried to do the LSP and Vim and set all that up. And it's so nice to just click install and have that in VS Code. So we recently were like, you know what? We've used Annotate forever. I loved it at the time, but Rails LSP, like what Tenderlove showed at RailsConf in his keynote, was like, I can just hover over the user class and then see all of the schema. I would much rather have that. And like Annotate was fine, but it gets out of date pretty easily. And it just ends up with, if you have a big table, you have a crap load of comments at the top of your file and you can't easily get to the code. It also caused a lot of merge conflicts for like Jumpstart Pro customers, modified stuff. So we're like, I think it's time to go. I'll miss you, because honestly, reading through the DB schema to do the equivalent is really annoying, trying to find the right table. Because you might be like, I want to go to the users table. Well, users count and users columns are in other places too, and you find those first. So you can't like jump directly to where you want to go, usually searching the schema. But that feature in the Rails LSP is phenomenal. So, but I was kind of curious because I had a little trouble setting it up initially, and I think it had just not received the /activate request or whatever it is. That starts it.
It installs its own gem file in like a hidden folder that you can't see. That's the problematic in the beginning.
That's actually the Ruby LSP will do that in a .ruby LSP folder. But for the Rails LSP, it actually needs inside your Rails server. So it's an additional gem. You add it to your development group in your gem file, and then VS Code or the extension will basically hit /Ruby_LSP Rails, and then there's like an activate route, and it's a rack middleware that gets added to the Rails server only in development. And it's kind of cool because you can just poke at the request yourself. So I was looking at the middleware and it was like, oh, there's a /models and /whatever, and it takes that string and looks up the model and then gives you the schema back. And I was like, oh, I can just go to /model/user and get a JSON response back of email, string, ID, integer, whatever. This is, at the end of the day, pretty simple. I really love how easy that is. I think they're talking about possibly making it the Ruby LSP where it could run a separate Rails server, so it doesn't have to be added to your app directly as a dependency or development dependency. But I'm just very excited about the cool features we can get from tools like this, because there's so many things that it can introspect, because you know what? You're hovering over in your views, this root path or user's path. It can be detecting that and then check the routes or check the models or check the helpers or whatever the heck you've written in your code, because it's actually running your code and it can introspect that stuff. It's wild. So just such a cool idea. Can't wait to see where it goes. But I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll try and do this in Vim. But for now, I'm going to just try and use VS Code more and see if I can use that and get it working. But again, same thing as my computer that's torn apart on the floor. I don't really want to have to configure my editor a whole ton. I got work to do.
I had almost finished adding this gem to Podia by the time you finished that. All I'm saying is that, yeah, I'm not really good at much, but I'm good at configuring stuff, dude. So I've got years of experience configuring VS Code. I run it lean, very lean.
I'm in the same boat. And that's kind of what I wanted in Vim as well, was like, if I SSH into a server, I'm going to have Vim, but it's going to be no plugins. So the more I can get used to using Vim with no plugins and not having these very custom things, I can at least be a lot more portable when I'm jumping around doing stuff. So I kind of feel the same way about extensions in my VS Code editor, but these are worth it.
Yeah. I go through and delete ones that I don't think I've used in the last month, like every month.
Oh, nice. It's like the advice for moving. If you move into a new place and you've not opened this box in 3 months, get rid of it. That stuff you don't care about is probably junk. Or if it's sentimental, take photos of it, then you can get rid of it because you can always look at the photo, and that's why you have it, for the memories. And the photo will trigger that same thing for you.
You don't use NeoVim, do you? But you're using
I still use
NeoVim.
MacVim. MacVim has like an actual Mac GUI window, so it's not just in my terminal.
Right.
So I can command save and like some normal-ish Mac shortcuts. But that's really all I use. And then the other integration is like the mouse cursor. You can click and highlight code, and it knows exactly where you intended. So if you're doing that in your terminal, you just be like highlighting text in the terminal, but not actually like inside Vim. I initially started on MacVim like many years ago and just keep using it for that convenience. Oh, this is a good one. Yesterday, what was I doing? I was trying to set like an environment variable or something in my terminal. So I open up VS Code. Then I open up the terminal in VS Code. Then I open up Vim in the terminal in VS Code.
This dude's got it.
Yeah. I posted in our chat for GoRails to Colin and Kent, and I was like, I think I accidentally just committed treason.
Did you bust open a Tmux terminal while you're in there, dude? Opens the Electron app. Opens terminal inside of Electron app. Opens Tmux. Opens Vim inside Tmux.
Yeah, then open Chrome again inside Electron. Yeah, it was one of those moments that I was like, oh, what the hell am I doing? But it was just like muscle memory. Can't beat it.
As a Vim guru, I'm going to call you that because you're probably the second or third Rails developer I ever saw use Vim. I'm not going to lie, you weren't as impressive as the first guy I saw use Vim, because the first guy I saw use Vim, I was like, I have to learn Vim or I'll never be a good developer.
Was that Ben Orenstein?
No, it wasn't. Ben Orenstein's probably way better than that guy, but I think it was just the like, what the hell is happening right now?
Yeah, I only kind of learned the bare minimum Vim to be like faster, and I don't spend enough time practicing the other things I can do with it like I should. So there you go. Practical Vim. Yeah.
Sitting right here.
But have you read it? Have you absorbed
read parts of it? It's kind of like a cookbook. At least that's what I would call it. To me, this is like filled with recipes. And whenever I need to cook, I'll just open my recipe.
Which is all the time. That's all you do is you cook.
Dude, I was cooking earlier. Dude, I'm not going to lie to you. What this book allowed me to do is realize the capabilities of what was available to do in Vim. Like, I had no idea that all this stuff was in Vim until I read this book. And it's just like, oh, well, also for people out there like, this dude's reading a freaking book about a text editor. You would be surprised at how helpful it is just to have like a concise, clean, someone already went to the trouble of weeding out all the crap out of this.
Right.
Just being straightforward. I'm curious though, ever since I've decided that I was going to move to Vim, probably know I'm already doing that in VS Code. Vim keep biting. It's cool. I don't use the NeoVim, but I have never installed or tried to configure Vim on my Mac. I went straight to NeoVim. So like I have like a very, very, very minimal NeoVim setup with one or two or three extensions. And as I slowly work more into it, I will add like another one. But I'm curious, you were talking to me and didn't know me yet. And I was like, I want to be a Vim user. Would you still tell people to use MacVim or regular Vim? Or would you tell them to use NeoVim?
So my thing was like, when I went from Sublime to Vim, I was like, I get paid to code. I can't become completely useless for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So my approach was, there used to be, and I don't know if it still exists, but there was a set of scripts to configure Vim.
Are you talking about from Thoughtbot or from online tool that would like build?
It
like
was from one of the GitHubbers.
Okay. Oh, was it from the Homebrew guy?
No, I don't think so. Janus was what it was called.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And that was what got me to switch. Yeah, Carl Huda Janus Vim distribution. Hasn't been touched for 7 years, so do with it what you will. But that was my first introduction to Vim because my goal was just, I need something to sort of make Vim as close to Sublime Text as possible so that I can retain my speed, but also like learn Vim. So that was part of the reason why I used MacVim as well, because then I was used to like Command S and whatever else for saving and just sort of the convenience features. That stuff's not a big deal anymore. But at the time it was annoying. So, and it's still, I guess, bit to that day, like not using Vim in my terminal, still use it in MacVim. So if I transition to VS Code, I'm trying to do the same kind of stuff where it's like switching and retaining maybe as best of Vim shortcuts and stuff as I can, but
right. In NeoVim, there is a package manager called Lazy, and then there is a distribution called Lazy NVim or something like that. Lazy NVim is like they use like the Lazy package bundler and they made their own like, here you go, it's got all the stuff and things. I think a long time ago I originally downloaded that and was like, I can't use this because there's so much in here that I don't know what it is that, you know, I can't learn like this. So I gave up on that a long time ago. And when I started rewriting my things from scratch, I used Lazy because Packer is now deprecated and Lazy is just the thing to use these days, I guess.
I think I'm still using this thing called Vundle.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
One of these days, I'm going to like throw it all out and start from scratch again. Because one point, like I got rid of Janus and I was like, well, I still need at least these core things that I did. So I've got a bunch of like configuration stuff and shortcuts that were kind of mirroring that or whatever. But it was kind of just the things I used and nothing more. It was a good way to learn, oh, that's how they configured Vim in Janus.
Right.
Like I didn't need to do that. I understand it, so maybe I'll change that because it was a little annoying the way they did it or something. It's a good experience, but you can get so in the weeds with that. I got to be productive. And I think that's probably why you see like DHH still using TextMate and stuff. If it works and you're productive with it, you're not going to be 10% more productive because you switch to hot editor of the day, like Zed, the just 1.0 or whatever of Zed.dev came out. I'm sure it'll be cool to check out, but yes.
The reason I brought up Lazy Vim is because I recently read their docs. Like, even though I'm not using it, I read all of the documentation and I started reading and trying to get an understanding of how they were setting like key bindings. And I've now taken that and put it back into VS Code, thinking about how to like trigger shortcuts more effectively, but also using like Vim key bindings to do it as well, but also like redoing the VS Code shortcuts. So it's like, okay, well, if I want to view something, I can have like a standard operation to do that. And it makes a lot more sense than some of the randomness in there.
I gotta figure out a couple little things like double equals in Vim for me will correctly auto indent everything. So if I had copied code from the browser or chat or something and paste it in, highlight it, double equals, it gets tabbed over correctly. And I don't know if that they call that necessarily auto indenting in VS Code. It might be like formatting these lines or something, but
you're just trying to outdent or indent, or
it'd just be
format.
whatever. Like if it was too tabbed over, it would pull it back. Yeah, it would just like fix
just
the
run
indentation
auto format.
Yeah.
There's some indentation commands to do that. That's why I asked, like, would your formatter fix all the problems? Because if so, I would just run the formatter, which is what I do.
Yeah. And I think that'll probably be the way I go. It's just one of those things where I'm like, I do it out of habit and I'm annoyed that it doesn't work the way I used to. So setting up something like that to have an alternative will help quite a bit. It just takes time to get those things switched over. And it's annoying.
At one point long ago, working on a course called VS Code for Rails developers.
Ooh. Didn't Caleb Porzio have a really good, awesome VS Code or something course that was pretty damn popular?
It was very popular. I did use that, yes. It was not for Vim or anything. It was just like
VS
how
Code.
to set up VS Code, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because he had kind of a unique, no sidebars and whatever.
I used it and I tried it and I just really didn't. There were some things I've definitely kept some things because I rewrite my like config from scratch like every several months. Get rid of commands that no longer exist. Make sure like anything that's, oh, I don't need to do this anymore because this got fixed or yada yada. So I definitely still have some of the things that he had, but for the majority of it, no. It was a really enlightening course though at the time.
I don't think I ever picked it up, so I like his stuff. Makes some good stuff. Before we wrap up, a long time ago, I remember saying the words mission control. We were going to talk about that. We'll just touch on it, but it's pretty cool. I was actually surprised it supports rescue, but I think 37 Signals uses rescue quite a bit. But that's cool because it's like Redis backend example, because I know everybody was kind of like, what about Sidekick? It's got a web UI. Can it work with this? I'm sure it can. Someone's just going to have to go build the integration, and maybe that'll be Mike, or maybe it'll be somebody who contributes it, but it's cool. There's shows your queues, shows the failed jobs and in progress jobs and block jobs and your workers that are connected like you would expect, and basically like what David had shown at Rails World. But what's really neat is you can actually connect in the Rails console to any of your applications, not just the application you're looking at in the Rails console if you want to configure that. So their example is they have set up Basecamp 4 and Hey, and inside of mission control, you can actually like see the queues and the workers and just switch between them. And then they can actually have rescue and solid queue running in Hey, and you can click on tabs between them. It's pretty cool. And it's got an extension that I didn't even realize, I don't think, that in Rails engines, in your engine file, normally you're putting like config initializer things in there. You can actually do a console block and inject things like this jobs help or something command and a connect to command in the Rails console. So you can basically mix in features. And if you run jobs help, it'll be like, hey, you can connect to any job server using this command, and it'll show you the available options. And then you can just run it. And then you can say activejob.jobs, and it will tell you exactly what's happening on that specific server, which is cool. And that activejob.jobs doesn't exist. So when you run the connect to command, it's actually defining that for you and whatever. It's pretty neat. I did not expect that to be like part of the library for mission control, but you have a dashboard, but also programmatic access to any of those workers and queues and stuff that you might want through a generic interface. So pretty sweet.
That's another reason why I kind of want to try SQLite, just to be like, I really am kind of interested in what they're doing over there. Although I don't envision myself switching off of Postgres and Sidekick, but still would be very interested.
You can run solid queue on Postgres. So if you want to play with mission control,
now you're talking.
You can still have it on Postgres. So you don't have to use SQLite for this. It's more or less for like an app like Campfire, maybe something simple. Actually, did you see Polkin's tweets about he took Campfire and then replaced AnyCable with AnyCable? It was like the one server could easily handle 1,000 users or whatever, and it was like a 1 gig of RAM server or something small.
AnyCable one of the was good,
real good. It was just awesome to see. Like, yeah, you know, you could support 1,000 users with the AnyCable, but you're going to need a fairly good sized server. And then if you want to just swap out the internals of that, boom, here you go. AnyCable to the rescue. And that was the open source version too. So
very nice. Dude, you love to see it.
Yeah, it's just awesome. Like that is a great, well, library and product, because the paid versions are going to be killer for anybody that needs the extra support and the extra features. And it's a really good example of another library like Sidekick that is open source, but has the enterprise level tier to it or whatever. It's a great business model for those libraries where it's like, here, you want a taste of how good AnyCable could be? Replace it with AnyCable. And then if that works and you got a heavy load of WebSockets, enterprise version is always there for you. So it's pretty sweet.
I'm excited to take a look at that.
Before we go, happy Apple Vision Pro Day. I was just looking forward to signing on to the podcast in my Apple Google goggles, whatever.
I didn't even realize it because I saw MKBHD's video on it, or like watched some of it the other day.
Yeah.
Now I realize he probably gets it early, doesn't he?
Every video of his is, I've been living with this for 2 weeks now.
Dude, he's our hero. He's a freaking hero, dude.
So
Stan
funny.
MKBHD.
Yeah, I watched that too, and he had some good points on it and stuff, but it was like, there's like no killer app in it yet. You can watch Apple TV on there, and that's pretty cool, I guess. But
that's exactly what the problem was with the Facebook one.
Oh, sure.
The Oculus, that's exactly the same problem. There was like one game that was fun. Did you ever see anyone playing anything other than freaking Beat Saber for real?
Yeah, not really. There was some zombie. Was there a Resident Evil game that was pretty good, I think?
I might have. Dude, it's sitting in a room. I'm never going to touch it again because it has to have a Facebook account now, and I ain't doing that.
I know. Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yep. Last thing before we go. This will be a long episode. Do you know anything about how Dependabot works? Because I did not. So in Jumpstart Pro, I used to have it set up where like you configure it and it will like create a YAML file and add gems,
right,
but it would generate a separate gem file that gets eval'd. And at
you
a
talked
point,
about your nesting issue.
Well, yeah, that was part of it. And then we got that nesting fixed, but it turns out that like the gems that are conditional, where they're like reading from the YAML file and whatever, that part does not work because Dependabot only copies over specific files from the repository. So it will pull like your gem file, maybe your gem spec, any of those eval gem files or require relatives, it will pull in. So we fixed that part, but it does not copy over the config jumpstart.yml. So when we go to parse it, it's just like, oh, that file doesn't exist. So it's just a default config with no extra gems. So then our gem file is just false for all of those optional ones. And I don't have a way to tell it copy over the YML file. So I've been trying to figure out a solution for that. And one of our customers, Zilvinus, mentioned, what if you made it a Ruby file instead? It was like, oh, that could work. Like we could assign, instead of a YAML file, just take Ruby and dump a Ruby hash with correct Ruby syntax out to a file. And then we could require relative that. And that could work.
I was basically going to tell you to do something akin to that in a GitHub action.
Yeah. We got to do it.
API though? I think they have an API.
I'm not sure, actually. That's a good
or
question.
Maybe, well, they integrated with GitHub, right? It's the Rails app.
Yeah. I downloaded the Docker image for Dependabot, and you can run it yourself for development and stuff. And it's fairly complex to get running.
I've done it in the past. I don't know the answer to your question off the top of my head, but I've figured this out in the past, so I'm sure I could figure it out again if you need help with it.
Yeah. No, I think his suggestion was going to be like really crafty.
Yeah.
When he said that, I was like, oh, you know what? As long as we can spit out a Ruby hash basically with inspect, and then we can just drop that out into a Ruby file, and I think that could work.
Very similar to what I was going to say to do. Not the same type of idea of like, okay, we're going to have to hack this together here.
Yeah.
We're going to have to trick someone.
Right. So part of me was like, I hate that we're going through these hoops just to make Dependabot work. I feel like it should be more configurable or something. And maybe there is a config option I missed, but I didn't see anything. It just seems like this is not like 99% of Ruby applications are going to be just a gem file or a gem spec with no conditionals in it, which I understand. Dependabot core is open source or whatever, but trying to contribute to that is not going to be very trivial. So I won't be able to just, hey, could we add a config option for
this
all of
really
the
really obscure edge case? You're going to have to take this on, guys. I'm telling you.
Yeah, you guys definitely need to have this feature and maintain it for me. That's important. I do really love the idea of we have the configuration in memory. We can write it to YAML, but like to JSON or to, oh, you know what you totally could do too? You could write it to this file. Even if you wanted to preserve JSON or YAML, you could just put it in like the data section of the file You do all kinds of interesting things. So we could like
now
keep
you're
the
cooking.
YAML parser or whatever. But honestly, it was like we have such a trivial thing that if we just can take a Ruby hash and print it out as valid Ruby code, it's easier than our YAML thing because we don't have to have a YAML parser like we were talking about before, where we can't require psych or YAML library because we might require the wrong version of it because we're in the middle of running bundler. So that's not safe to do. So I will probably be reporting back next week on how this goes. It sounds like it should be very easy.
No, it's not going to be. It's not going to be.
Yeah, famous last words.
I already know you're going to hit,
sounds
you're
like
gonna
a
hit
great-
something, dude.
That's a great place to leave it. But yeah, I think converting, how do we detect that you have the YAML file and then convert it to the new format automatically?
Right.
Those little things, that actually shouldn't be too bad, but famous last words again.
It all sounds great, right? But so do most of my ideas. I just know you're going to hit something really frustrating. This is either going to go great or you're going to lose like the next 2 days of your life.
I'm already on that, lost several days trying to get Dependabot working with fancy stuff we got. So, you know, we're already there. What's another few days lost, right?
Just send it, dude. Full send it. I support this. I support the rabbit holes, dude.
Yes, sir.
Well, if you do wind up down that rabbit hole and you need a hand, I have a little bit, so let me know.
You got a little hand?
I have had a little hand around Dependabot before. Obviously,
I
have been
figured you
enough
would.
inside it. I knew it was a Rails app, and I remember somewhat the structure of it.
Yeah, now it supports like all these other languages and crazy stuff. It's cool.
Yeah, it is really nice.
Enough ranting. I'm going to go plug in some new RAM sticks in my computer and then go punch the wall when it doesn't work.
After that, plug in your freaking PlayStation controller, boy. It's time to get nasty.
I have a PlayStation 4. I don't even have a PS5
So does
yet.
Kent.
I got to get a PS5 at some point.
I swear I saw one at your house. Dude, Big Baller Chris don't got the PS5, dude. You slipping.
I've been waiting
Kent's
for the-
cooking on the PS4, dude.
I was waiting on the Pro that was like supposedly going to come out, and then the Slim comes out. It just is like, all right, I'll just play on my PC that doesn't work.
Well, you could obviously just do that. Oh, but your computer does. Okay, now I understand now. I understand now.
Yeah.
I understand.
But now I got to get the whatever Nintendo Switch 2 or whatever that comes out this year.
Dude, little kids are cooking on mobile Call of Duty. Like, what they got their little fingers on their phone and
Oh,
they're just
yeah.
sitting there frying people.
I'm going to have
But
to get Jackson started on that.
get him in front of Fortnite as quickly as possible.
Get him signed to an esports team before he's 2 years old.
Yeah. He'll have ADHD by like the time he's a year and a half, but
Yeah, and
it'll be
he's going to
okay.
have spent like $10,000 on skins.
That's not that much. That's chump change for the skin. I call them the Boynes boys because those are the boys that took their credit card out and they bought it. I will admit, I have Homelander.
It's
and
fine to buy a few, but some of the people like, oh my
no,
God.
collecting them is crazy.
Or the people who are like the Counter-Strike skins that
Dude, the knives in PUBG.
all the gambling sites and whatever preying on kids.
Yeah.
And then like the streamers that actually
Yep.
secretly own the gambling sites. That
Yep.
stuff was crazy.
Yep.
And it's such a big business.
I remember like walking into my friend's dorm room in college and like watching him like sell virtual shit on this game. And I'm like, dude, I've been playing games like this my entire life. I have no idea what you're doing right now. And I have no idea why there are 3 zeros behind that comma.
Yeah, I remember hearing about you can sell your Diablo 3 character on eBay for like $900 or something. I was like,
Boy, then what's
what are you
my
talking
RuneScape
about?
character worth? Shit, I
Oh
got
my
a good
God,
Club
yeah.
Penguin going out. Club Penguin's dead too. R.I.P. Jeez.
it's kind of crazy, but thank goodness I didn't grow up where that was a thing that I wanted.
I value money, so I have never, ever really wanted it, ever.
Well, that's the thing. The kids just like, they don't know how
It's
to
a
make money
status
or
symbol,
whatever.
dude.
It's, yeah. So for them, it's just like, I just want this stuff.
Because
Like,
you can
but you don't have to work.
micro pay for everything, dude.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, just slip a little here, slip a little
You know
there.
what? Maybe we start charging $1 for everybody that downloads this episode.
We're taking it out of them in the crypto. We're mining their crypto anyway, dude.
Yeah.
Go fix your computer.
Genius. Or
But
go punch the
I
wall.
have a feeling it's going to be one of those
Yeah.
days for you.
A hole in the wall.
Hole in the wall.
All right, man. Until next week when I have more
Until
Dependabot things.
Next time, more Vim, more Rails, more code. Let's go.